For tonight's reading, I want you to turn to the book of Ezekiel. And I want to tie the book of Ezekiel, chapter 1. Now everybody's got to get up and go find a book, right? Anyway, if you're a true student of Torah, and I don't mean this facetiously, it is my understanding that truly the deeper you go, there are two things you want to understand. One is called the work of creation. That's the story of Genesis. The second thing you want to learn is the workings of the chariot. Those are the two most important things in the deeper studies. If you're looking for true understanding of lots of things, and tonight's lesson, I hope, will give you some understanding of that. Because what we're going to look at is not something that you would normally tie between Ezekiel and Numbers chapter 8. But this is where I want to start. And after I finish reading the scripture, I'd like you to keep your finger there or put something in it so you can keep track of it. But I want you to look specifically at Ezekiel chapter 1, and I want you to look at verse number 4. Because verse number 4 is going to tie directly to the menorah. And it makes no sense how it does it. So when I start talking about teaching, I'm a teacher. I am not a rabbi. I have no ability that way. I spend my time studying, searching, researching. And so when Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg, started talking to me about his lessons, he didn't teach me specifically, but every lesson was called a meditation. And if we look at a meditation, we're looking at something that is prayerful and deep. And so that's the way I try to approach as many lessons. And this is probably going to be the deepest lesson that I've ever taught. And so I hope I come across and give you enough things to think about, to meditate on, that you actually have grown by the time it's all said and done. But I want to look at verse number 4 for a second. So this is Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4. This is the workings of the chariot, okay? We're going to go from the workings of the chariot in Ezekiel, and we're going to go from there into the works of creation. That's all going to tie together, I hope, if I do this correctly. It begins in verse 4. I saw, and behold, there was a stormy wind coming from the north, a great cloud. Now I want you to notice 3 words. The first one is flashing fire. Now the word that I want you to pay attention to is the word esh, which means fire. And a brilliance surrounding it. Now the word for brilliance is the word noga, which is the word for brilliance. And the third one I want you to look for is surrounding it and from its midst, like the color of hashmal. Hashmal is the third word that I want you to understand or to put into your vocabulary. So the first word that I told you about was esh. And in English, it's E-I-S-H, or it's well, you can do it in Yud, Shem, but that's the first one. The second one was Noga, and now the third one is Hashmal. This is the only time the word ever appears in the Bible, Hashmal. So there's significance in understanding that word, if nothing else, out of this text. So I want you to go back to Numbers, which is actually our reading. And I want you to go to Numbers chapter 8. We're only going to do the first 3 verses and hopefully give you some rich understandings about creation and about the chariot. So, verse 1 in chapter 8. Hashem spoke to Moses, saying, speak to Aaron and say to him, when you kindle the lamps. Now, the word for kindle here is actually the word for our parsha, and that's to raise up. So when you raise up the lamps, or the cast of the light itself, towards the menorah, towards the face of the menorah, shall the 7 lamps cast light. So Aaron did so toward the face of the menorah, and he kindled the lamps as Hashem had commanded Moses. Now, this command and all that's going through here did not happen on the first day that the tabernacle was open. Now, there's various positions as to when it happened, but it was not the first day. You see, Aaron knew how to do this. That was not the question. Aaron didn't know why he was going to do it this specific way. And notice it is a specific way, because he says, cast the light towards. And that's significant because it means there's a focus here. And so what we're going to look at is the focus of what's going on. So God spoke to Moses, commanded him. Aaron heard what was being said, and he understood that there was more than just simply lighting candles when he was working with the menorah. And so the explanation became important to him. Now, in the course of study, you'll find out that the light that the high priest had was not to touch directly on the wick. It was to be near the wick, so that the fire moved from his hand to the wick. It drew close, but did not touch. And I want you to keep that in mind as we go through this whole thing. Now, I also want you to understand in the book of Proverbs, it tells me in Proverbs 20:27, God's candle is the soul of man. God's candle is the soul of man. So we're going to make draw some comparisons, draw some analogies. And I want you to meditate on this idea of us being a candle. And it's also going to hold true as we go deeper into the story. Now, Rabbi Schneerson taught that when we desire to kindle another soul, when we desire to do that, we must steadily hold our own source, our own light, close to his, near the fire, in order to begin kindling it. Notice again, very similar to the way the priest had to work. We don't rub chests with the other person, but we draw near to the other person. And by drawing near, it does not mean just simply proximity. It means that there's a closeness in your thinking. You're beginning to reach out to them, and you're beginning to draw a relationship with them. That's the idea behind what's going on. So until it is no longer dependent, until this character is no longer dependent upon you, that's how long you're going to do this. So it's not a 10-minute process. It's not even a 10-day process or a 10-year process. As long as it takes, that's what it's supposed to be. So sometimes, excuse me, I have an itch. Sometimes it's about this idea of drawing near. We always attempt to draw near to God. Now we're talking about drawing near to one another. That's another step. Because remember, we're supposed to do both, draw near to God and to draw near to our fellow man. That's part of this whole creation process. Now, the idea is that this character who you've drawn near to needs to be able to find his candle lit. And therefore, with his candle lit, he too can now draw near to another. Not that you desert him as a friend, but that you now reach out further than before. I come to this understanding of, I know in the New Testament, they talk about the fact that you're supposed to go out and tell. I like the Jewish process better. The idea is that it's the idea of drawing near to one another. It's not about beating them over the head. It's about having a common language that you create between the two of you. Now, there was a book that was written a long time ago. It was called the Kuzari. It was written by Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, in which he talks about the fact that when you watch a Jew pray, or when you watch a Jew read the Torah, you find him swaying back and forth. Now, Rabbi Halevi was beginning to talk to another group of people about the Jewish understanding. And he made the point in that same understanding is that this swaying is to be like a candle. It's about the fact that you're drawing near and far, near and far. You're going towards, you run towards, and you run away. You run towards and you run away. That's the thing. Down here in Texas, one of the things that's drawn me to the outdoors is the fact that there's so many tall, slender pine trees down here. And as the wind blows through the trees, I can't help but think of myself or think of a candle. I can't help but think about davening, because it's like God is causing the trees to daven towards him, that there's a language going on, that there's something happening up above. Well, now let's go back to the candle. In our story that we're looking at, the Hebrew word for a flame is shelavet. Shelavet. Now, it may not mean much to you, but shelavet has a value of 737. And I give you that number because it's going to mean something, I hope, after we're done, because you're going to find it used in multiple places. So the number is 737. Now, in the Shema, the prayer that's spoken, that you speak 3 times a day if you were a Jew, there is this part of the commandment that says, with all their heart, or with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. That phrase is 737. So the flame is like the Shema. You understand what I'm saying? The flame is like a Shema. It's the idea of the Jew. And again, if we understand that the Shema is about love, it's about drawing near, then you can understand that the candle is the same thing. It's the drawing near that's important. Now, as you also look at it, I want you to know that there's another thing that we need to understand from this. And that's the fact that that as we go through reading about this, the commandment is to light the flame is only complete when all three of those phrases are done. So I can imagine in my sanctified imagination that when Aaron was lighting those candles, going through his mind was the phrase, with all my heart. Can you understand that? That's the phrase that would have brought those two ideas together, because you understand, understanding Judaism is understanding how things link together. And this is just one of the links. Now, in all the cases, what we're talking about is the idea of heart. The heart is the center of all of this. The heart is the center of the flame, and we'll get to that part soon. But I want you to understand that there's basic attributes that we're talking about. One is fear. There's the attribute of awe and compassion, sincerity, devotion. All of those go along with our heart. All of those should be a part of our coming together and understanding. Now, there's a book that I read all the time, and it's finally dawning on me. Some of the parts that I've read are making a lot more sense. Most books in Jewish study are not easy for me to understand. First off, I wasn't raised in a Jewish home. I've been doing this on my own for years, and I'm getting better at understanding. And when I go and have a chance to interact with a Jewish rabbi or whatever, I try to draw from them some of the understandings that I really have been struggling with or befuddled by. Well, in the book called Sefer Yetzirah, which is a book called the Book of Formation, was said to be orally spoken by Abraham way back when. Today, the book I have has actually been a translation by Ari Kaplan, who was a rabbi who lived in Chicago, well, in the early 50s and 60s, and who died at an early age. And many people have speculated that the reason he died is because he was telling too many secrets of Judaism and the Torah. But anyway, in his writing, he says, the Book of Formation, we learn the 10 emanations of light are compared to one flame. Well, the 10 emanations of light are the 10 Sephrot. Those are the emanations of light. And so as we do that, then we have to understand the light that he's talking about is Chevrolet. Again, the concept is that you need a source. You need a place for energy. And we're going to get into energy when we talk about Hashmal. I'm not going to go as far as I could because we're not going to get into the idea of electromagnetism and electricity and electrons and protons and all of that, because that's also a part of the creation story. That's also a part of what I learned just this week. Well, anyway, let's look at a candle. So in your imagination, in your mind, since you don't have a candle before you, I want you to think about a candle. What does the flame look like when you're looking at the flame on a candle? Well, there are actually 3 parts besides the wick that you should see. 3 parts to every flame. The first part I want you to know about is the brilliance of the flame. What is the word for brilliance? Noga. So the aura around a flame is called noga, brilliance. That's one. Do you remember I said that was also found in Ezekiel chapter 1, verse 4? Again, Ezekiel chapter 1 isn't about spaceships. Ezekiel chapter 1 is a book or a lesson on how to meditate. That's the true significance of that book. That's what it's all about. It's not about spaceships and landings and all of the other things that could possibly be done. It's about meditating. Now, the second part of a flame is the part that we would call the it's the silent part of the flame. It's actually the blue-white light of the flame. That part's called mal. It's also referred to as what's my word? Esh. And again, it's that centerpiece of the flame. But if you were really looking at the flame closely, you'll notice at the very bottom of the flame, just above the wick, you'll find black or dark blue nothing. What appears to be nothing is actually something. That something is called Hashmal. Hashmal. Now, Hashmal is basically 2 Hebrew words put together. Hashmal, noise, lightning, loud. Hashmal is also the Hebrew word for electricity. Electricity. So what we're talking about is, again, 3 parts to the flame. The flame is something which flickers or moves back and forth. Now, as we look at it, the first stage is about silence. Hush. Closest to the wick, it's about quiet. You can't hear it. You can't see it. You just know that there's something between the flame and the wick, and that's the hashmal. But at the same point in time, the second stage, which is also the stage of fire, also has sound to it. That's the mal of it. It's the separation. And in a flame, you actually can say that we're separating good and bad. That seems like a contrary idea. But as you begin to go through understanding from the days of Genesis, everything was about good and bad. All the way from the word Bereshit, from the first letter, everything was about duality, the separation between one and the other. The third part of it is also about mal, but this time we're talking about the sweetening of the light. Because you see, in a dark room, light is something that's very important. And so that's the thing that we're going to be talking about. Oh, by the way, Hashmal, Esh, and Noga have a combined value of 737. So what's the possibility of 737 being found in 3 different forms? Rare, hard to multiply by. But we have the flame itself, Shalalet, we have the Shema, and now we have the 3 words. And you shall love God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. So when we love God with all of our heart, soul, and might, we begin to kindle that flame that they're talking about. Now, in a normal menorah, there are 7 candles. Each of the candles stands for a man, a character. If you were looking at it from the bright side, you would say the 7 men were Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Moses, Aaron, Joseph, and David, the shepherds of Israel. But I want to talk about another menorah. That's the menorah called Hanukkah. Hanukkah doesn't have 7 candles, it has 8. Plus a center mass candle, a Ness, the master. And so what I want us to understand is this is where we're going to tie creation together with formation and the chariot. Here's our story. The lighting of the candle is not only let's go this way. Hanukkah. All the other feasts, the major intent of the feast centers around festivities and food. In fact, Hanukkah never was in existence until the Maccabean era as we know it. But I'd like to tell you that it started a long time before that with Adam. And we'll get to that story. But when we go back through this, Hanukkah, we said, well, that's about winning the war over the Greeks. That's about making oil last for 8 days. The answer is that's a good thought, but that's not exactly what it's about. You see, according to the rabbis, Hanukkah is about light, or, and the hidden or, which is called or ganuz. Or ganuz. Now, for some of you, if you want to spell it out, it's O-H-R, and the second word is H-A-G-A-N-U-Z, or ganuz. That's the word that we're going to learn. That's the hidden light. Where did the hidden light start? Well, now we go back to creation. So the story of Hanukkah really goes back to creation. It goes all the way back to day 1. Day 1 was about what? The establishment of light. Let there be light. That was where we began this whole process. Now, the one thing we have to understand about that light was the fact that that light isn't the kind of light that we would normally think of as light. In fact, you and I both know that light, in terms of illumination, didn't show up until the 4th day. So the first light that they're talking about isn't the light of illumination. It's not the light of a candle. So what is it? How does it work? What's its function? That's the part that I began to dig into, and that's where I wanted to go. But I began by understanding, first off, that what we're talking about is something that is so hidden that oftentimes we don't even bother to see it because we have no frame of reference. So I want to try to give you a frame of reference tonight. So throughout this meditation, I'm going to move from the light of a candle to the light of a temple menorah to the light of a Hanukkah menorah, because you see, the Hanukkah menorah was never in the temple. The Hanukkah menorah was outside. That's what makes the 2 menorahs different. And they have a different function. That's what's going on. So we're talking about the festival of Hanukkah, kinda. We have to also understand what was the light of creation. Now, light is commonly viewed by us as, if we're looking for a metaphor, we call it wisdom. That's what we normally think of as light. So the light of the first day could be wisdom, understanding. But that's not what the rabbis began to focus on. That's just what we understand it to be. You see, it's the universal symbol of understanding, but it's not the whole thing. We would say, I get it. Or, oh, yeah, I see now what you're talking about. Now, during Hanukkah's 8 days, the world is spiritually illuminated, though we can't see it, by a glorious hidden light. That is what the rabbis understand is actually happening. It is hidden light for 8 days that's being exposed to us. But what's our problem? We have no frame of reference and we can't see it. So let us get a frame of reference and then see if we can see it when Hanukkah does arrive next time. Now, Hanukkah literature says, these lights are holy. May we only gaze upon them. You see, this light was not intended to create light for the room, nor was it intended to give heat. This light had a special purpose. It was to be gazed upon. But not only was it be gazed upon by you, because normally if you put your Hanukkah menorah out, it's not in your living room. It's not near your television set. It's not anywhere close to that. It sits in the front window on the outside of the house. Now, in my case, my front window is where my dining room is. And so I have several walls between me and the light. So I can't see it from where I'm at. But that light is there for a purpose. And that purpose comes to our understanding. The temple menorah was in the holy place, not in the world. The Hanukkah menorah was not in the temple, it was in the world. So our understanding has to be is that the Hanukkah menorah is set outside. It's the building in order to illuminate the world, to give them understanding, to give them wisdom. That's what it's for. But how many people will go by and see it and not understand what's going on? Well, probably most of us. So this light dispels darkness, not much, depending on how bright your candles are, but its purpose is to dispel the darkness around it. Just as on day one, light dispelled the darkness and created for us what we call day. That was what was happening. Now, Hanukkah celebrates this single jug of wine or a single jug of oil that was still last one day, but instead it actually lasted 8 days. And this idea was that it was about redemption, being redeemed from the Greeks. Because remember, the Greeks really weren't about trying to eliminate Judaism. They just wanted Judaism to be open to all of their understandings. They wanted to Hellenize the Jew. And in Hellenizing the Jew would then lose the value and become assimilated into the world. And you remember, the Greeks were always interested in philosophy. They were always interested in debate. They were always interested in the things that, the body. That was another thing that was big for them. Sports, those were big things for them. But again, Hanukkah is light, but it's not about light. It's about mystical light. Now, Maimonides said, light is often used in the Torah to mean knowledge and wisdom. Now, with the words, let there be light, creation emerged. The Talmud explains that this light illuminated Adam and Eve for 36 hours. And we get a new word now, 36, or new number, 36. So 36, and we're talking about redemption, and we're talking about Hanukkah. So 36 is a number for redemption. So we keep another thing in our heads. Can you see how many balls you're going to juggle as you really begin to go into the Torah? It's not something that you can pick up overnight. So as we're going through the 36 hours that Adam and Eve experienced were from Friday about noon until Shabbat evening, when it became dark and we moved into Sunday. So those were the 36 hours that it talks about. So every generation, there is a time of illumination, a special time. And it's the time from Friday through Saturday night. Now, there's also an understanding of 36 that's different than what most of us think. There's a 36 of elevated souls. You see, in order to maintain and preserve this world, there has to be 36 special Tzaddikim, special righteous people. And I don't use the word men because in that group, you're going to also have to include the characters called Sarah or Deborah, or name them. There's others, but there's always 36 of these characters alive. And if there would ever be less than 36, the world would disappear because there's not enough holding it up. Not to say that our prayers don't mean anything, but in relationship to what God is about, we have no knowledge of all that we need to know. Now, in the following verse, or in that verse, it says, and darkness was on the face of the waters, or on the face of the deep, or in the face of abyss. The Torah says, and God said, Yihi Or. Now, Yihi Or means let there be light. Or is light, and light is the 25th word in the Bible. Good. Well, here's another set. So if we have 25 happens to be the numeric value of when it appears, guess what? Yihi also has a value of 25. So now you have light, and now you have Yihi, let there. Not only that, we aren't finished yet, because as we have to go through, Hanukkah just so happens to have occurred on the 25th day of Kislev, 25. Do you see how numbers seem to be constantly going over and coming back again? That there's lots of ways in which we can look at a Torah portion and we can begin to match it up with other places. The only problem is our Jewishness is limited. Okay, at this point, I want to help you better understand what organuz is. So it's an expression, possibly the deepest expression in Judaism, because it's an expression that was created only 2 or 3 centuries ago. And why is that? Because until 2 or 3 centuries ago, nobody could understand how it related to creation. It was the character called Arizal, Yitzhak Luria. He was the character who defined the word, or Haganuz. Now, Adam and Eve, in the very beginning, were obviously creatures that were created. Haggadah 12a talks about the fact that they were originally glowing, just like the face of Moses was glowing when he came down the 3rd time off of Mount Moriah, or off Mount Sinai. Only not their face, but their whole being glowed at that particular point in time. And this glow came from what we would call the organuz, the primordial light, the light of the first day. That's where it came from. Now, as we think about it, Adam and Eve lost that glow the moment that they ate of the fruit. We know that from the fact that they began to search for clothing because they were naked. We get that concept. We also have to understand that if we're following the Bible, according to Genesis, scholars say that Tishri was the month in which Adam and Eve were created. That's fall. Well, Adam and Eve, after a period of time, noticed that the sun was getting less and less in the sky. They began to see more darkness and less light. The light was hidden to them, just like it's hidden to us. In fact, finally, they got to the point where, wait, the sun is now appearing longer and longer in the day, in the sky. And so they celebrated the lengthening. Can you guess the time of year in which they celebrated it? Kislev. Kislev. Now, Adam created for himself and his wife a celebration. How long did the celebration last? According to Haggadah 13a, 8 days. So the first Hanukkah was in the first years of creation, not when we find it with the Hasmoneans. So what we have then is a quasi Hanukkah. Now the Orizal continued to talk about this idea. In fact, actually, he didn't write anything down. All of his writings actually came from his disciple, Haim Vital. That's where his writings actually came from. And so in this whole process, he began to look at the lights themselves. And he said, when they glowed, they literally carrying the 10 Sephiroth. And each of those Sephiroths were surrounded by this hidden light, the organuz. When Adam and Eve fell, those lights on the lower end of the Sephiroth, all the way up to our understanding, shattered. Those barriers were no longer there, and evil was now able to come in and actually feed upon the goodness that God had created in Adam. Because we know after Adam took of the fruit, and the same thing that's happened to us, good and evil now became blurred. It became something else. And so in order to protect Adam, what did God do? He gave him a skin, an ore, if you will. Another example. So the Arizal tried to resolve the perfection and the idea of how evil got involved. We today, oftentimes, I don't know if you do, but as the Kabbalists speak, they talk about the sparks that we are, in our ways, are supposed to be collecting those sparks of the original Adam and Eve, those sparks that covered those original places. Now, how does one do that? First off, you don't know what you're looking at. That's because, again, it's hidden. What God asks of us is to do what? To pray, to give charity, to study. Those things provide us with the opportunities to collect sparks. Now, as we're going through this, these lights that are lost, the total value of each of all of them is 378. Well, again, I got to make a number match that. And so I did. The word is hetzamel. Hetzamel. It's actually 2 words, but it means 8 garments. 8 garments. So originally, God then clothed them with 8 garments. Is there any other Jewish character that has 8 garments? He's called the high priest. God clothed Adam and Eve in priestly garments. Now, that's not all of our story, but that's the beginning. Because you see, that word hetzamel can be, what's the word that I'm looking for? The letters can be rearranged. It can be permutated. And if I permutate the word hetzamel, I get the word hashmal. Hashmal. Back again to where I started from when I read to you the book of Ezekiel. Now, the word hashmal, it's the only time that it's going to appear. There we find the story of, well, there's another story that I found in a midrash. It's a story of a boy who was visiting his rabbi. And he sat down in a room while his rabbi was out of the room, and he read the story of Ezekiel chapter 1. When the rabbi came back into the room, the boy was on fire. There was no fire in the fireplace. The fire came from the boy, because you see, the boy understood what the word hashmal meant. And so God brought him home. That's the understanding of the story. Quite different. But again, the idea is the fact that Hashmal is very significant. Hashmal in Hebrew also is the word for lightning, or for electricity. Now, that part of the story I'm going to leave out, but I just wanted you to understand Hashmal has a place. Hashmal is also considered the color, excuse me, the color of amber. The Baal HaTurim, Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, who lived in the 13th century, said that Hashmal is some kind of concrete force, and the idea is force. Incredibly, he would go on to say the Ark of the Covenant, that box, was powered by Hashmal. He came to that conclusion by the fact that, well, first off, if you took that box, which is not only wood, but gold on the inside and gold on the outside, and you put those two holes through it, made from gold, that the box itself would be so heavy that literally the poles would break. And imagine if you put priests on those poles. Could they carry it? Well, the understanding was they didn't carry it, it carried them. So Hashmal is a force. It's a kind of an energy. And so as we look through this Hashmal, according to another rabbi, Moshe Cordero, he was Rabbi Ari's teacher or mentor at one point in time, said that this vessel is a physical substance that not only powers the Ark of the Covenant, it also is the power of the angels. May God forgive me, because this is what the rabbi said, may God forgive me for revealing this most sublime secret. So we're looking at things that at that point in time were never meant to be discussed. It's only in the last years that the rabbis, speaking with Rabbi Schneerson first, said that the Kabbalah is now open to all. It is upon us to be able to begin to look at it and study it. There was another rabbi called Rabbi Vital, who could speak no more of this than only to say that Hashmal is a very important substance that gives the angels their power. Before him, the Ramak would have said that Hashmal is the physical force that carries and gives life to the mystical chariot. Okay, wrapping up. I've gone 45 minutes. Let me say this. Putting it all together, the word first used, Hashmal, and only used, describes the vision that Ezekiel had. It plays a role in the early days of creation, Hashmal. Adam used it to see all the way across the universe when he was glowing. The force field that guards this, well, it's still there for the top Sephiroth, but it is us that have to regather those sparks for the rest. The ark was powered by the Ark of the Covenant was powered by Hashmal. It can be used to generate visions. Prophets used Hashmal. This is why Ezekiel, most prophets prophesied from Israel, and almost all of them prophesied from the Temple Mount. That's where they received their impressions. Ezekiel was never, ever in the city of Jerusalem when his visions came to him. He was already in captivity. That's why it says that he was by the river Kavar. Kavar is the river called already. Well, already what? Well, we would say it's already the Euphrates. If you do that, then you've got to go back to Genesis also and find the 4 rivers that flow from Eden. So these waters were special waters. And finally, it isn't entirely, it isn't entirely spiritual, but it is a clear aspect of what's going on today, Hashmal. I guess I'm at this point through. Hopefully, there's plenty more I can teach. In fact, when we come back to Hanukkah, I think I'll probably go back to this subject and try to do more justice to it. But I give it to you now, hoping that you'll meditate on some of this, hoping that you will spend some time on your own. Maybe spend some time reading Ezekiel to understand what the meditation was about. How did it make Ezekiel into a prophet? What was involved in that whole process? So anyway, 7:45 here. I give you some time. Anybody have any thoughts? I hope you've been thinking and meditating. Anything come to your mind?